Iguodala to Curry, back to Iguodala, up for the layup. Oh, blocked by James. Curry, one-on-one. Irving puts it up. It's good. Kyrie Irving from downtown. The three, steps back, crossover, puts up a three. Rebound James. Second. It's over. It's over. Cleveland is a city of champions once again. The Cavaliers are NBA champions.
Cleveland! This is for you!
What's going on, Cavs fans? Welcome to a special edition of The Block, The Shot, The Stop, a Cleveland Cavaliers podcast brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Skylar Webker, and I'm joined with Kevin Lynch. And with us today is a special guest, Luka, a.k.a. Smooth, from RealCavsFans.com. If you haven't checked them out, they're putting out great content all around this Cavs team, both on-court topics and off-court topics. So welcome to the show.
I appreciate it. That lead and got me pumped up. I'm ready to lace them up and go hit a shot if I still can.
Let's do it.
I see your art behind you are kind of a reference to our show name.
It was not pre-planned. This was already there, so it's just good synergy already.
So, fellas, let's talk about the 31-4 Cleveland Cavaliers, currently sitting in first place in the East, first in all of NBA. We have a showstopper marquee matchup tomorrow night against the Thunder, the best team in the West. Luka, we'll start with you. You're our guest. What has been your impression of, this team this year? Your expectations? Like, where are your feelings kind of this far into the season? Pretty
good. I think that's a good place to start. A few things come to mind. One, I think one of the biggest headlines is Kobe's validation that this core could work, and they really just were a coach away. I know there were a lot of angst over the offseason, which, to be honest, I was one of them. Not going to lie about that. About really, could they afford to sit still and just see if this coach would work, which he's right so far. So, I think that's the biggest story, just really seeing the development of this team under a different coaching staff. Some of the things that stick out the biggest is pace. So they're 6th in pace this year, 24th last year. So just seeing how they operate both in the half court and out of the half court, that's been one of the biggest things. They talk a lot about, pacing, spacing, not only body movement, ball movement. I think that's one of the biggest things we've seen that's really helped them carry the momentum offensively. And surprisingly, they're also first in points in half court and first in scoring in half-court situations. They were 18th last year. So I know there's a lot about pace and how fast they go and how fast they play. And, the J.B. Bickerstaff style of half-court, grind it out, wasn't effective. But they've increased their effectiveness in the half-court, which is one of their biggest jumps out of a lot of the stats is how good they've been in the half-court. So I think that's one of the biggest things that has really propelled them to the start. One of the other things that I think is lost in all this is young players' developmental arcs aren't linear. So you have Mobley is 23, Garland is 24, Allen is 25, Mitchell is 28. These are far from finished products, and I think there was a lot of judgment being passed based off of maybe 1 year, say with Garland with the health issues, saying, well, he and Mitchell can't work because of what happened last year when it was not so much a pairing issue as much as just a individual regression due to injury and other outside factors. And so being reminded that these are still young players, still developing. I mean, Evan Mobley still can rent a car maybe in some states because he's not even 24 yet. So just keeping all that in mind that development is not linear, where you're thinking of a Kyrie Irving where he's, day one to, wherever he's at that quickly, where he's that good of a player. These things take time, and then it's not always right away. So I think being reminded of that, and really it's been right place, right coach, right time, is Kenny Atkinson and this team is ready for him, and he was ready for them, and it's really taken off.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Luka made some great points. I've talked about. I was with you. I never once doubted the talent of a lot of the guys on the team. I did doubt their ability to kind of coexist and play collaboratively, bring out the best of each other. It just seemed like they had a lot of guys with kind of overlapping skills. I was completely wrong this year, as you're alluding to. The right coach, right role players, right system kind of is really bringing out the best of everybody. I mean, I think the thing that I think hasn't been talked about enough with the Cavs, and is so crucial in today's NBA, is Skylar and I the other night, we were talking about how this Cavs team is unbelievably good, obviously. They're unbelievably fun to watch. They have really charismatic personalities. You can tell how well the guys seem like almost like a college team, the way they're goofing around. And then, I said the other night, they're so professional. Like when they on a back-to-back, when lots of NBA guys will either sit out or, just come out slow, come out sluggish, all that stuff. They just jump on teams right away, and they play at the same high efficiency rate almost every game. And the other thing that I think we should mention, the Cavs have maybe been the healthiest team in the NBA this year. And I don't know who gets all the credit for that, whether it's the players playing through bumps and bruises. We've talked to Kenny Atkinson's done an amazing job, limiting minutes, which obviously reduces the opportunity for injury. The Cavs training staff, shout out to them. But you look at between the big four, they've missed a total of 4 games, those guys. And I don't know for sure, but I'd be willing to bet a serious amount of money that any other NBA team, their top 4 guys have missed more than 4 games. And so not only the ability to to play so incredibly well, but to be available every single game is a skill in today's NBA, and it's a skill the Cavs have better than anybody in the NBA.
I think that's one of the benefits that has come along with Kenny Atkinson. Kenny, I was one of the people that were afraid of the new coaching system, not in the sense of stuff would change. I thought, the defensive production would take a massive fall off the cliff, which I have been wrong, which feels really great. But
why do people listen to us if we're all wrong all the
time? Well, to go along with your point, Kevin, is Kenny Atkinson loves having depth and keeping everybody's minutes so low. I mean, it's rare if anybody plays over 32, 35 minutes a night. And that, I think that goes along with keeping guys fresh, avoiding injury, not having to play through bumps and bruises. I think a lot of that goes with Kenny. And I think he needs kind of more credit than anybody with how he's kind of day one instituted a system, kind of changed everything about the Cavs offense, how they run it, shown who he's confident in, back-to-back coach of the month. I mean, I don't know if we've ever seen a coach come in to Cleveland, at least, and be this effective and dominant and just well-received.
Yeah, and Luka, I'd love to ask you specifically about the Cavs defense, because the Cavs offense is amazing. It's the best offense in the league. We'll talk about it plenty, but the defense, the month of December when they had the 10-game, 8 of the 10-game winning streak was in December. They were 12-1 for the month. They were giving up less than 100 points a game. In your opinion, why is the defense so good? I mean, they're 7th in the league now and climbing. How do you think the Cavs defense is so good? Because the one thing they lack is defensively is the one thing you would think is a premier wing defender, but they still have managed to still be one of the better defensive teams with all this kind of explosive offense.
I would challenge them and say, do they lack that?
Yeah, I think, maybe I'm wrong again. I don't know.
So a couple of things. I think one of the things that, I had some concerns about coming into this tenure. I was really excited for Kenny personally. One of the things with defense. So he was involved in Golden State defensively. So we had done a coaching profile on Kenny kind of leading up to this, kind of showcasing his work in Brooklyn and Golden State. He changed a lot in Golden State. So I know he kind of talked about a lot about that, even offensively. So offensively in Brooklyn wasn't nearly as offensively diverse when it comes to cuts, movement, as he saw in Golden State, and now he is in Cleveland. It's has some semblance of what he did in Brooklyn as far as the drives, the pick and roll game, but a lot of the cuts in motion he took from Golden State and really emphasized that more in Cleveland. So you're seeing some of that development as a coach. Defensively, some of the things we're seeing are some of the things we saw in Brooklyn as well. Really more of a drop big coverage. So when you see guys going around the pick and roll, they're very switch heavy. So you see a lot of switching on the perimeter. Something that carrying over from JB Bickerstaff. You're seeing more drop coverage. So your bigs kind of dropping back more, taking advantage of their shot blocking and asking the guards really to get around screens to contest those shots. But one of the biggest things you've seen difference wise is how creative and chaos causing they've been in flipping teams on the other end. So last year they were 19th in steals. This year they're 10th. That dropped a couple spots recently, but they've been really aggressive in getting deflections, getting steals, and really converting that into transition and open opportunities. So they've been really, really good about forcing turnovers, more so than they've ever been previously. And I think that's because of the more aggressive nature with how they've coached their defense, as opposed to JB Bickerstaff, where guard your man, be safe, don't make any mistakes. Where you're seeing LeVert, you're seeing Garland be a little bit more opportunistic in how they're approaching offenses, and that's turning into easy points, easy transition, and it's causing issues for the defense. I think that's one change we've seen from last year that has carried over, in addition to that overall defensive mindset that JB Bickerstaff established.
Yeah, it's incredible. We've talked about it. These guards, Garland and Mitchell, they've never been all NBA defensive players, and we've never needed them to be. We just need them to be good NBA defensive players, and I think that's something that Kenny has really put into effect is, the effort and being havoc causing and being sticky in the passing lanes. I'm happy to be wrong about Kenny's coaching profile coming into this season.
Well, and you used the right word, Skylar. I think some of it comes down to effort, because I think Kenny should get all the credit for the schemes he brought with him on both sides of the floor. But sometimes it's about motivating the guys, and the guys taking it on themselves to give great effort on defense, because defense is the least exciting part of the game, right? For a lot of people, not everyone, but I would say for most NBA players it is.
Nerds like us.
Yeah, well, we talked about this year. I don't know that I've ever seen, even dating back to his Utah days, Donovan Mitchell as locked in defensively as he is this year. Like, he is giving unbelievable effort on that end of the court, even if it's taking away a little bit from potentially taking a little bit away from his offense. Like, and when your leader is giving as good of effort defensively as they ever have, I think that kind of sets the tone for the rest of the team. And then you have elite interior defenders in Allen and Mobley, which certainly help when it comes to protecting the rim.
And challenging the rhetoric, I figure we can get into this about the wing defense. I think Dean Wade is that guy. Personally, I'm a Dean Wade guy. I love seeing him in the starting lineup. I know the numbers have said the offense has been a little bit better with Isaac Okoro, and that's been consistent even pre-Kenny Atkinson, going back to JB Bickerstaff. That offense actually has worked really well with Okoro in the starting lineup. But I think what Dean offers in that starting lineup is a switchability across all the bigs that you maybe don't get with Okoro. The defensive rebounding, being able to clear some of those rebounds, especially if you are a switch-heavy team. If you're switching Mobley or Allen out onto the perimeter, you have Dean Wade still back there, maybe on a guard, being able to rebound better than Isaac Okoro does. So I think some of those things defensively really help with Wade in the starting lineup. But what I would say is Evan Mobley is your big wing defender. I know a lot of people are obsessed with getting that guy, but if you look at some of the lineups, if you look at the closing lineup the Cavs will likely put out there, it's the core four plus pick a wing. And when you go up against Boston, who's guarding Tatum? Evan Mobley. When you're going up against Indiana, who's guarding Siakam? Evan Mobley. When you're going up against the Knicks, Mobley's probably on a Bridges or OG Anunoby. You're going up against Oklahoma City, who's Evan Mobley going to be on? Jalen Williams. So, and then conversely, Wade or Cora, whoever that is, they're able to guard the other perimeter player, maybe it's Strus, whether it's a Jaylen Brown or SGA or someone else. So I think as they're currently set up, they match up well with a lot of these teams, even the Magic, Mobley on Banchero, and then Okoro, Wade, whomever on Wagner. They have those pieces there, so I think they are set up well, and that big wing is maybe just, Kevin, you mentioned maybe more insurance for Dean Wade as opposed to maybe trying to replace him, but I think they have a lot of those pieces there, and they can switch out so many different pieces of the core, whether it's Levert, Okoro, Strus, Wade, whoever's playing well, they have that flexibility where all those pieces do something a little bit different, and they can kind of ride the hot hand depending on the game. So personally, not as worried as kind of that big wing rhetoric that we've maybe seen out there, just because they have so many different pieces that work well and do a different job. But ultimately, Evan Mobley's going to take on a lot of those tasks just because of how other teams set their lineups.
I couldn't agree with you more. I would say I love Okoro and Dean Wade as interchangeable parts depending on the matchup, or maybe what one guy's just has it going a little bit better that night and everything. I'm a huge fan of both. Dean Wade, it's like my favorite stat that I really just learned about. Since they got Donovan Mitchell 2.5 years ago, they're 91-33 when Dean Wade plays, 39-36 when he doesn't. this season, as impressive as 31-4 is, they're 25-1 when Dean Wade plays. And I think it's a credit to. I think Dean Wade is a fantastic role player and fits perfectly as a role player with the Big Four. I think he brings a little bit of a different elements than maybe some of the other role guys do. But as you said, as we were talking before the show, I don't necessarily want to replace anybody. I want to have someone as Dean Wade insurance because he is injury prone. And if we got someone who could basically fill Dean Wade's role like a break glass in case of emergency guy, that's really where I would want to go, because I agree with you. I think Wade and Okoro are a perfect interchangeable fifth men with the Big Four.
And we haven't even gotten to Karis LeVert, who, just going through the numbers, if you look at core four plus those guys, you want to know who's been the best fit statistically is LeVert. So LeVert this year with the core four, 86th percentile net points per 100 possessions. Last year there really weren't enough minutes just because of all the injuries, but the year prior, 89th percentile net per 100 possessions. That's significantly higher than it was with Wade and Okoro. So again, you're talking about, I know a lot of people like to compare to Iguodala at the Warriors, kind of being that fit, that sixth starter almost, just because of everything that he can do. So that's why, to me, as long as you have all those guys, because of all different roles they play, it's not as important to get that role, that fifth starter. If you can, great, but the focus really shouldn't be there just because they have a lot of malleable parts that they can use depending on the matchup. And as we've seen Kenny do so far, he's really good at finding the matchups and executing that.
Boy, is he. We talked about it earlier, especially in the first win streak. Now here again, the second win streak. This Cavs team finds every way to beat somebody, and a lot of that is exploiting what the other team is going to give them. Whether they're going to give them threes and they're going to shoot 45, 50 threes a game, they can hit them. And as there's a piece that got put out today that they are the best team as far as catch and shoot threes and catch and shoot and pull up threes. They are the best team in the league in both categories. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think to that point, I think one of the things we've seen throughout this year that's made this feel more real is that it's sustainable. So last year, a lot of the focus defensively and offense was kind of an afterthought, and a lot of JB's thought was let's rely on Garland, Mitchell to really carry the load, try to create for us, do what they do. This year, you have a different player leading the scoring just about every game. Whether it's Allen and Mobley taking advantage from the matchups inside, maybe it's Mitchell going off one game, maybe it's Garland. And the way that they've built this system to be sustainable and democratic and not overly reliant on any one particular player when it comes to the minutes, when it comes to the touches, you've seen that be more effective because defenses can't key on one guy and say, okay, we're going to stop this guy and then therefore we're going to shut your water off. It's any which guy. It's second quarters with Ty Jerome. Now it's second quarters with Evan Mobley. You have some of the best clutch time stats with Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell. So because they're not having to carry the load in the first, second quarter, they can rely on other guys to do that, and they can save energy for the fourth quarter to produce when they really need to. So because of how democratic and how sustainable this offense has been, it's only going to benefit them in the long run. But I think that's what makes it so exciting is that this is not built on any one particular player. It's more so built on the system and a collective unison of players really working together that makes this more exciting than saying, Donovan Mitchell's having an MVP year. Of course they're going to be good. Well, something happens to him, you're screwed. Now, you have a much larger margin for error, and that was the thing last year that hurt the Cavs so much. They had a very slim margin for error with how slow they played, with how physical they played, with really the reliance on those offensive players. Something went wrong. It really did not leave a lot of wiggle room. Now they're giving up maybe 100, 120 points on some nights, but it doesn't matter because they're so good offensively. So the margin for error, because of how they're playing and how they're structured, is really widened, and that's only benefited them greatly to how well they produce.
I couldn't agree more. This is kind of a perfect timing for the Cavs. And Skylar, I know you want to talk about kind of the finances and the aprons, and maybe this will lead into it. But the Cavs, because Mobley hasn't hit his big extension yet, and in the contract situation, most teams don't have this collection of talent, right? A lot of NBA teams, they're paying two or three guys so much that they're filling out a lot of the bench with guys who are making $5 million, $6 million a year or less, and so the Cavs really are in the sweet spot of having superstar players and still enough of the salary cap left to bring in high-level bench guys.
Yeah, especially because all these guys either on their extensions or their extensions are about to kick in, there's a lot more sustainability in that piece. But we'll get into move on into kind of the financial piece of it and kind of talking about the NBA aprons and how those taxes and stuff work. I know you guys put out a great piece about the Cavs kind of financial stability. One quote that I loved in there is like, this is not what Dan Gilbert can spend. It's just how Colby Altman can spend it. So that's a great lead into this. Luka, if you want to kind of talk us through some of the aprons and stuff, I got a graphic here I can show that was from Keith Smith. Let me share.
Fellow Blue Wire podcaster Keith Smith, we should say.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like having a credit card. Like, you might have a high credit card limit, but just because you have a high limit doesn't mean you need to go blow it all at once, because there's going to be repercussions down the road, especially when it comes to interest rates. Same with aprons. And so, we've seen Adam Silver actually come out and say the CBA is doing what we wanted it to do, which was to deter spending. So this is placed on teams to increase parity in the league. So instead of seeing super teams gather up and allow them to be together much longer, and if owners are willing to pay, so be it. Now what you're seeing is this not only being financial penalties, but also transactional penalties, where the further you go into spending into some of these thresholds, your ability to retain players or acquire players is significantly impacted. So when fans hear luxury tax or aprons, yes, Dan Gilbert has the money. I don't think he's worried about the money, but money is not going to buy them out of the aprons and how they can build their team. So that's important to note into this, is why they're concerned about the luxury tax this year, or why they're concerned about aprons, is because ultimately there's going to come a fork in the road and they have to decide what they want to do. You're hearing like with Denver, they might have to trade Michael Porter Jr. to fill out maybe some other positions or have them get better. With the Phoenix Suns, there's only so many different things they can do because they're a second apron team. They can't take back more money in a trade. They can't sign players above a minimum contract. They can't aggregate players, so if you want to trade 2 for 1, you couldn't do that because they're in the second apron. So all these things make it so much harder to have a team, retain a team, and improve the team the longer and further you're into the apron. So that's the most important thing to know. It's not only financial penalties, but it's transactional penalties that you incur as you get into these aprons further and longer. And so one of the key terms you hear this year is luxury tax, which everyone's familiar about. Dan Gilbert paid that previous LeBron years. But what has changed in the new CBA is they've added a repeater tax. So what that means is that if you are in the luxury tax or above for 3 out of 4 years, doesn't have to be consecutively, but as soon as you're in luxury tax 1 year, that starts that clock. So if you're in a luxury tax that year, including any other 2 years out of a 4-year span, you're automatically considered a repeater tax team. So what is a repeater tax team? It does a few different things. One, it increases the penalty of what you pay. So instead of take Georges Niang, so he's making $8.5 million. Under the previous luxury tax, here I think it was 1.5 per dollar, so you'd be at 14.8 million of what you would actually be paying for the $8.5 million salary. Under repeater tax, you're paying $23.3 million because that dollar is then increased. So we've seen teams like the Warriors and Jake and the Warriors ownership group and Steve Ballmer, who's the richest guy on earth, say, I'm good. They had to break up Paul George, break him into pieces. They broke up Klay Thompson, broke him into pieces because of how restrictive and how penalizing these were. So repeater tax is important. You talk about the payment issue of it increases how much you pay, but also it has a potential to freeze draft picks, meaning you can't trade those draft picks if you're in that repeater tax, but also it could push your first round pick back to the back of the first round. So when we talk about repeater tax this year, it means if they can get under the luxury tax, not being a luxury tax paying team, that kicks down the road when that clock could potentially start. 'Cause it's going to start next year. There's really no way out of luxury tax next year. So if they have the flexibility to do it this year, you're essentially giving yourself another year of breathing room when it comes on the back end, when Mobley, Allen, Garland, their maxes are really maxes. I think a few years down the road, all 4 of them are going to account for about almost 100% of just that salary cap alone, before you get to the taper. And so it's going to get expensive. So basically what you're trying to do is give yourself some breathing room down the road to where you can add some talent, still be sustainable when, these guys are hitting their prime. So that's what we can get into a little bit more, but that's kind of what you'll hear a lot about this year's repeater tax and luxury tax, but it's about how they spend it to ensure this is sustainable, because as we mentioned, these guys are young. They're not going anywhere.
No, I mean, that's great information, Luke. I guess I'm of the mind. So some fans would say, like, who cares about tomorrow? You have a chance to win a championship today. Let's go get whoever you need to get, right? And other people say, like, we have a core. You listed off the ages. Like, our core guys are between 23 and 28. This thing could be built to be a contender for 5 more years if they play it right.
Dynasty.
Right? Yeah. So, you gave us great information, but like your very educated opinion, what do you think if you're Kobe Altman? What do you do between here and the trade deadline or at the end of the season?
Before I get to that word dynasty is important.
Yes.
And the reason why I want to mention it is because I think it's something that most Cavs fans can appreciate. In the LeBron era, I think we were so used to burning through all the assets, and then when we saw when LeBron left, this team was left in shambles. Because they burned through everything, they didn't care about tomorrow. They got him a championship, no complaints about that. But I think what you're seeing now is they have the potential to compete now, but also build it sustainably so that way if something does happen, they can pivot easily, they can add when they need to, and this can extend longer instead of you reach a certain point and then it's, oh crap, it's over. As far as this year, I think there's 2 questions to ask yourself when it comes to a trade. Does the trade significantly impact the team competitively, and is it worth staying in the luxury tax for? So with some of these trades, yes, maybe, Larry Nance or yes, maybe, a more base level guy. Is that guy really worth staying in the luxury tax for? Not for the fact of paying it, but because of what that means long term. Is 3 months of Sam Merrill worth what it could mean on the back end of these contracts? I think those are the type of questions you have to answer if you feel comfortable. Like, obviously, if a Cam Johnson becomes available and that's something that is within their reach, yeah, that's a no-brainer. But some of these more baseline level moves, like, is it really worth the long-term consequences of satisfying your immediate need that really may not be worth it?
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's you want is the time with Sam Merrill worth another year in your championship window, and I think most Cavs fans would say no. Sam Merrill is expendable to add another year of contention.
Yeah, I agree. And, the other thing is if they're making trades and everything, I'd love to get your opinion on this, Luka. Like, most likely, like, Karis LeVert would be in a deal for anyone significant just because of the way the money works, and he's an expiring deal. Karis is not only a big part of this team, but since they're going to be in the second apron next year anyway, they're going to hold his bird rights. They have some advantages to re-signing him if that's what the Cavs choose to do. Mm-hmm. What do you think about the implications of that, of Karis? You read off some fantastic stats about how important he is to this team, how he's really adapted his game. He's shooting career highs from threes. He's basically shooting threes and at the rim. He's gotten rid of the mid-range and become incredibly more efficient. What do you think about the, pros and cons of maybe trying to get a little bit different player than Karis versus keeping him and then trying to use the advantage to re-sign him in the offseason?
Yeah, so I don't know if it has to be Karis, but I think if you're looking to make a significant move, it probably has to be one of the wings, whether it's Strus, Okoro, and LeVert, just because they're all competing for the same minutes. They're all higher paid players. So if you're looking to reallocate assets, I think that's where you first start.
Well, wouldn't most teams want LeVert since he's an expiring deal and those other guys are? Just curious.
But potentially, obviously expiring deal on this current marketplace and the current CBA standard, probably does hold some value. But I think Isaac Okoro could hold some value too, just because of his age, his upswing, and also he's signed for a relatively affordable deal for 2 more years after this. Max Strus may be the guy where just because of his age and production and salary, that may not get you what you need. So I think LeVert and Okoro are probably the 2 guys that you look at first. But to your point, earlier when we talk about if they want to make a significant move, where is it at? It's probably using one of those players just to get to a level of which you need to make salaries work. But you have $30 million in Okoro and Strus already committed next year. We did some analysis on LeVert. He's probably looking at the $12 to $15 million range when it comes to his projected salary next year, just based off of previous market comps. So that's about $45-50 million just in those 3 players alone. Taking a step back, you have to look at sustainability. You have Jalen Tyson, Imani Bates, Luke Travers, Sam Merrill potentially if you want to re-sign him. You have all these guys on a cost-controlled salary that could potentially replace some of those minutes. You can reallocate that money elsewhere. Now, you don't have to. Like, if they want to retain that talent, they can, and they can keep doing what they're doing, but it comes to a point now they haven't been all healthy. But when they get all healthy, and especially as they get into the playoffs, there's going to be a minute crunch to some extent. So is that money really worth well spent on the bench, or it maybe can be reallocated elsewhere to better suit maybe team needs up front? So I think those are the type of things to think about. And one more thing I'll add in talking about, how as cores get expensive, it means less elsewhere. So and looking at how other teams are built, you can look at teams like the Celtics, the Knicks, whoever it may be. 76ers and Nuggets have no players outside their starting lineup making more than $10 million next year. The Celtics, the Bucks, and Knicks have one. The Lakers and Suns will have two. The Cavs will have two, maybe three, if Okoro's a starter. So that's where, just really in this financial environment, yes, they can sustain it for the next 2 years if they really want to. They don't have to move these guys. They're going to be a second apron team, which is fine. Everyone's locked in, so you're not as concerned. But if there's a significant move to be made, it's reallocating some of those assets and consolidating them elsewhere.
That kind of brings up kind of how we. I have another graphic here. This one's from Fear the Fro, Bob. So this kind of outlines where they are going into next year with the Karis LeVert, the Ty Jerome, the Sam Merrills, and just kind of a good outlook of what we're looking at next year as far as penalties, if this roster stays exactly where it is.
Yeah, and just so you know, Luka, we're a Ty Jerome podcast, right? I don't want to hear anything about it. Doesn't make financial sense to resign Ty Jerome. We had a contest towards the beginning of the season when he was really on fire to give Ty Jerome a new nickname because there was something goofy with the nickname he had, and so we nicknamed him TJ Maxx because he brings great value every day. And I think he's played all but one game this year, actually. So, kind of going with this graphic and what Skylar said, like, I don't know. I don't know. I hate the thought of losing any of these guys, but the Cavs are going to be in the reality of the NBA finances soon.
Yeah, and again, they can pay all these guys. They can re-sign Jerome. They can sign Sam Merrill. They can re-sign Karis LeVert all next year if they really want to, and hit second apron. Like, that's not really an issue. Their only difficulty is Ty Jerome because they don't have full bird rights on him. With Karis LeVert, they can re-sign him to any contract they want, up and over the luxury tax or the salary cap. I'm sorry, not be an issue. With Ty Jerome, because he's only been in the team 2 years, they have partial bird rights, meaning they can give him a slight increase to his salary this year, which is about $2.5 million. It ends up being about $5 or $6 million, which maybe if you're feeling really generous, being buddies with Donovan, with Kenny and Kobe, maybe he's willing to take a discount. But he's in a position similar to what the Knicks were with Isaiah Hartenstein, where they only had partial bird rights. They can only offer him so much money. With Ty Jerome, that I think it's either 110%, 125%, and ends up being about it's 100. I forget it's either 110%, 125% of the previous year average player salary in the NBA. And what that projects to be is about like that $12, $13, $14 million range per year. So that's the max that they can offer Ty Jerome in the offseason. So if another team wanted to come in and say, hey, we really value, just like the Knicks were strapped with Hartenstein this offseason, and Thunder came in and said, we're going to pay you over that, that's all they can do. But I think with Ty Jerome, his play recently, while hasn't been great, it's given them a discount maybe, or makes it more realistic to obtain him. So there's a upside to his downside. It's been that. But ultimately, they can keep everyone together, so they don't have to trade anyone. And I think Karis LeVert's play this year has really changed the narrative where you want to keep him. Like, if you really don't have to get rid of him, you probably don't want to. But it's just a lot of pieces and parts of how to make this Jenga puzzle work.
Jenga puzzle. It's a great analogy for this. So, I mean, that kind of leads us into, like, the next topic that we're going to talk about is how does this team approach this upcoming deadline? Going back to your guys' piece about the financial flexibility or the financial future of the Cavs, to pull a quote from there, 3-and-D was yesterday. Cost effectiveness is today. Every team will be looking for effective players locked up long-term on cost-effective deals. So that kind of leads into what you were saying about Okoro could be highly valued by other teams, kind of anybody that's really on multiple years, but cost-controlled for those multiple years. Yeah,
and we've seen Kobe Altman do a great job of that coming into this year, whether it be Lamar Stevens, kind of finding those diamonds in the rough. Craig Porter Jr., he's locked up for another couple of years. He's knock on wood, Ty Jerome insurance this year, this offseason. You have Dean Wade, who's locked up for a super under market deal. So you have these guys, Jalen Tyson, who's on a rookie contract. So you have all these guys that are in a position where they're extremely valuable. And even when we talk about ducking below luxury tax, is it worth that giving up that cost control as assets just to get below the tax this year? That's another thing to consider when you think about all these different pieces. But those are so important because the more of those players you can have that can eat minutes in your rotation and do so at a low cost enables you to have higher paid core players and have him for a longer time. Because ultimately, as much as Kenny Atkinson, we love him. As they say, it's not about the X's and O's, it's about the Jimmy and the Joes. Like, if you don't have Donovan Mitchell and Evan Mobley, it doesn't matter where you're going, right? So the longer that they can afford those and the more that they can pay them, the better they can be. And to balance that, it requires these cost-controlled assets, which become even more valuable to teams like the Cavs.
Yeah, and that's one thing that we've noted. It's kind of gone under the radar, but I think it's coming more to light now, is the Cavs seem like over the last few years they've developed a strategy to try and find those diamond in the rough, sign them to two ways, let them develop in the G League, and then bring them on. Like Dean Wade's a great example of that. Sam Merrill's a great example. Craig Ford Jr. is another one. And it seems like they're trying to do that right now with, you mentioned Luke Travers and Monty Bates as potential, cost-controlled assets for next year that they could maybe potentially sign them for, under market deal or something. Do you see that as something the Cavs could do as soon as this year or projecting into the future to kind of maintain this balance?
Yeah, and I think it all depends on. So right now they have 14 roster players. So if they drop below 14, that's when there's an opportunity for them to convert. Similarly, I don't know if they stay in the luxury tax past the deadline, then they may try to convert one of those guys just to get them controlled through next year and open up a two-way spot. So it's something that Kobe Altman's done a lot in his tenure with Sam Merrill, back to Patrick McCaw, back to trying to think of some other guys. But he's done a lot of these cost control deals at the end of the year to really take advantage of that conversion. So if they stay in the luxury tax, it certainly opens it up. If they open up a space on the roster to get below the luxury tax, it just depends on how low they get. Can they convert one of those guys to a contract? Last year, doing some research, we saw some of that happen after the deadline. I think Keon Ellis was one of those guys. His two-way converted to about a $600,000, $700,000 cap hit that year. So can they get below that much to convert a Travers, a Thor, a Bates to a contract going into multiple years? That's the question.
It feels very like baseball. Like it feels like, we're going to farm them up in the farm system, in the minor leagues, then call them up, get the cost control at a lower value until these guys kind of are able to see the market. So it does feel like that's the approach that Colby's taken, but I think most of the league is taking, is kind of trying to farm guys instead of just sign everybody.
Well, and I think Kobe's doing it better than a lot of people because not only do we have some of the success stories that we mentioned, Amani Bates and JT Thor are incredible talents. They are, like, for being in the G League and being, someone that it's an incredibly good lottery ticket to buy, because the worst thing that happens is they don't work out and it's not really costing you anything, right? The best thing that happens is they hit and you sign them to what ends up being a below market deal and you filled out a rotation spot by kind of developing these guys, right? It is, you're right, Skylar. It is very kind of baseball approach, but I think it's going to be a new approach that more and more NBA teams are taking to try and manage, all these aprons and financial restrictions that we talked about.
So I want to run through some maybe, buyout candidates that we can talk through. I know they're in the luxury tax, even though they're in the luxury tax, goodness, mushmouth, they still have no buyout restrictions. So they're still able to add some of these guys at lower end deals to fill out some either minutes. One name that gets thrown around a lot, especially on this podcast, is Larry Nance Jr. I think he's a perfect buyout candidate from the Hawks. They don't play him. And I think he's a guy that would love to return. Luka, what are your feelings on Nance?
Would love him. Don't think he's obtainable. I think early on, some of the reporting we've seen is that the Hawks were turning down any inquiries to Nance. It's their annual dance of shopping Clint Capella. Previously it was John Collins. Now Clint Capella's taken that mantle, and he's being someone who they shop every single year. So I'm not sure if they're thinking about moving Capella and possibly re-signing Nance and going with Okongwu in the starting lineup. But so far, it seems like they've turned down any inquiries to Nance Jr. He was playing some with some injuries that they had. So I'd be highly shocked because they are a competitive team this year. Typically, you see buyout candidates either via trade after, they try to clear roster spaces, or on, say, some bottom dweller teams that they're trying to get rid of veterans to have them go elsewhere. So because the Hawks are good this year, because they've had some injuries and because Clint Capella does have an expiring deal, I'm not so optimistic that Nance becomes free. And even on the trade market, this is one of the things that gets difficult is I think Nance is making around $10, $11, $12 million this year. Cavs don't have a lot of guys that get to that spot. That's the Isaac Okoro, Karis LeVert, Max Strus number. Are you willing to give up one of those guys just for Nance? That's where it really gets kind of tricky. And if not, are you willing to build salaries of, a Tyson, Merrill, multiple guys to reach that? Probably not. So because the Cavs have done so well with how they've played this year, it makes trading really hard. And because they don't have any easy guys to fill contracts, trying to build deals that make sense, it gets really complex really quick.
Well, shoot down our Larry Nance dream.
Yeah, I know. We like to limit the speculation, but we're speculating right now. Do you see anybody, especially kind of those teams that are out of playoff contention now with the play-in? There's not that many of them, but do you see a possible fit in that could be in the buyout market, or that could fit, as a trade within the kind of restrictions that we talked about?
Yeah, so a couple of the names that go to immediately on the potential buyout market is Bojan Bogdanovic in Brooklyn. So former teammate of Donovan Mitchell, in one of those cases where don't really need him, not really part of the timeline. He's on an expiring deal. He's been injured. He's probably going to get back at some point, but are they really going to keep him next year? No. So that's the type of name that makes sense where he might become available. And if he's available and wants to come to Cleveland, bring him on in. PJ Tucker is another guy who's on an expiring deal, has been away from the team for a while. If they can't find a taker from at the deadline, maybe someone who tries to get bought out. Marvin Bagley is another one in Washington. Again, they're going through a youth movement. Is he really going to play there on an expiring deal? Chris Boucher with Toronto. I kind of thought in the beginning of the year with Toronto maybe being not as good. Could he be a guy like a Larry Nance where does a lot of things on both ends? But he has been playing for them, been playing really well. He might attract some interest on the trade market. If not, maybe he is bought out. So those are some names I would look at as potentially being buyout candidates, which is still good. And ultimately, that's another thing you have to consider. Is it worth giving up assets for someone when some of these names are on the buyout market? Where's that delta at? Is it worth giving up potential assets? Are they that much better than what some of these buyout players could be moving forward?
You didn't get me excited about any of those names, if I'm being honest. Because honestly, I was thinking about some of the guys, PJ Tucker, Marvin Bagley Jr., guys like that. I don't think they fit the way the Cavs play. Most of the guys that you mentioned. Now, could they, could players kind of change as they come into a system? Of course, but I'm kind of the mind, if that's your market, I'll roll with what we have. And if there is a trade that makes sense, especially if he can get you under a luxury tax, do it by all means. If there's a tax or if there's a trade that would put you into luxury tax, but it's a guy who's controllable for years and everything, and it's willing to shave off a year of the window, by all means do it. But otherwise, I'm good just kind of rolling with what we have.
Well, one name that it kind of came out today, the Kings have waived Orlando Robinson. And I think that's a good kind of, I don't want to say stretch big. He can shoot threes and does shoot threes, but kind of fits this Cavs system of bigs that can get up and down the floor quickly, can switch off to any position on defense. I think that's a guy to keep an eye on.
You know anything about Robinson, Luka? And if there be any market besides just a buyout minimum offer for him?
Probably not. I think that's what he's looking at this point in his career. But I think it does get into kind of where, personally, I would be interested in seeing them acquire more depth is behind Frobley. So we talk about all the different pieces they have that can complement the core four. We've seen them really manage their injuries well throughout the year. Some smaller injuries, but they've been able to have guys step into the rotation in place on the guard and the wing. God forbid anything happen up front, they're screwed. So that's what keeps me up at night is how do they manage any type of foul trouble, any type of injuries? Because let's be realistic, Evan Mobley and Jared Allen both miss extended periods of time. last couple of years. We also saw in the Knicks playoff game where just some sort of third big to give them a breather, give them some energy, can be helpful, to give them a few minute break. So that's where I get really nervous and would love to see them add somebody, whether it's via trade, whether it's via buyout, is that big man spot. Because even though Niang and Wade have performed well, you are really thin back there. They're both more pure fours, although Niang and Wade in limited minutes together on the floor have produced astronomically well. Like we're talking 99th percentile pairing, two-man pairings this year, and even going into previous years when they've done kind of small ball. I don't want to call it death lineup, but when they called small ball with Wade and Niang, they've done really well. So they've been able to manage, but they don't have anyone else who can replicate some of the things that Allen and Mobley do. Not many people can, but they can get away with, replicating a Merrill and a Strus role for that extended period of time. They can get away with Craig Porter giving some of those play creation minutes if Ty Jerome goes out. They don't have anybody to kind of bring that shot blocking, rebounding, defensive versatility should something happen to Allen or Mobley. So that's where my mind immediately goes, whether it be on the trade market, whether it be on a buyout market. If they can do something to improve their standing back there when it comes to just safety and insurance, that's where I would love to see them look.
Yeah, a name that came up for us is Daron Sharp from the Nets. He's going to be a free agent, very possible to be a buyout guy. He would definitely be minimum. I think he's kind of what you're looking at is, a realistic option to bring in as a third, break glass in case of emergency big. If we're being honest, if there's any significant injury to Allen and Mobley, it might be curtains anyway. But that was one name that we kind of threw out there that I think like he maybe a best case scenario for buyout. That's the best guy looking through the realistic options. That's probably the name that sticks out the most to me.
All on the Sharp bandwagon. So I'm a big proponent of Sharp. I think at his age, physicality, extremely good defensive rebounding numbers, really good shot blocking numbers. We even saw him hit a three against the Cavs there. I wouldn't say that's his forte, but he's shown a lot of skill on the ball, and that's somebody. So the Celtics did something similar last year. So towards the end of the deadline, they acquired Xavier Tillman from the Grizzlies. Similar situation where a younger guy coming off a rookie contract, not really in the plans. They acquired him for a couple second-round picks, and they were able to extend him this offseason to a cost-controlled contract going into the next couple years. That's why someone like Sharp is so attractive. You can take somebody who's maybe not in the plans there, still young, still malleable, can fit in, and you can re-sign long-term to a lower-end deal. That's what gets really attractive about a guy like Sharp. But it comes back to a couple questions we talked about before with a lot of these assets. Is it worth staying in the luxury tax for Daron Sharp? Can you build a deal that makes sense? So Sharp's right at that weird level of about $4 million where if you want to get out of the tax, that means giving up maybe a higher paid player, which either the Nets likely don't want or it's likely too much. If you try to build too many guys, Merrill plus Thompson plus Tyson, is that really worth it? Then you have to, get in guys to fill in the roster, and you still maybe have a luxury tax, so it gets really complicated really quickly. So that's why I'm not too hopeful for what they may do, just because there are so many things that they have to consider, and it makes it walking the fine line of finding that right fit few and far between. And we also see on the trade deadline, and reading some of the tea leaves and seeing some of the reporting, they're more buyers than they are sellers, and the belle of the ball, maybe Cam Johnson. After that, we don't know. Certainly Brandon Ingram and Jimmy Butler could shake up the market with wherever they go, but after that, based off what some people are saying to start, there's really not a lot of supply out there, so it really could consolidate where people go, and there may just not be available deals to be made. But when you start taking a look at those guys, it gets really difficult really quick when you talk about luxury tax and you talk about just the fillable salaries they can put out, and you're kind of stuck.
Yeah. Well, that kind of leads into, we got some trade suggestions to run through. We'll start with the hot ticket, the name that everybody wants, Cam Johnson. I kind of rolled these through the trade machine, so financially they all make sense. I don't know, realistically, any of these make sense besides maybe my last one. So for Cam Johnson, something like that, or somebody like that would have to take Max Strus, Tyson, and picks. As many picks as you can give. What are your guys' feelings on that? I don't know if I love that because you really are kind of banking. You're doing the LeBron thing where you sell everything that isn't nailed down to the floor for one move.
Yeah, I'll answer first because Luka's going to be able to answer way better than me. My short-term answer is there's no way that'll happen because Brooklyn is trying to shed salary and Max Strus is signed for another 2 to 3 years, two years after this. So if they were willing to trade Cam Johnson, they want a bunch of picks and financial flexibility. And unfortunately, those are two things the Cavs can't really offer.
You answered it better than I would, so I don't know why you're doubting, but no, that's exactly that. And what I would add a few different things. One, I don't think the Cavs have the assets of a team like the Thunder, and don't have the motivation of a team like the Kings. So the Cavs are in a position where you need those two things to make a deal. Either you have really good assets, which they do, but do they want to give them up? And really be motivated to make a move, which I'm not so sure the Cavs are doing because they're so good right now. So you may see a team like the Kings, who maybe don't have that much assets, but have the desperation to make a move, be willing to go the extra mile that the Cavs don't. Additionally, a guy like Cam Johnson, like we talked about earlier, he's probably going to be the belle of the ball for a lot of teams. And so because there's a lot more bidders, I'm not so confident because the Cavs don't have those two things really, that he's going to be a realistic option. One of the other things you have to consider about Cam is he does have I think it's about a $4 million potential incentive on top of his deal. So most likely, that's on top of the $22-23 million he's making this year. It's really more so like a $26-27 million deal you're acquiring. So if you're trying to stay below the tax, you can. That likely means, Strus, Okoro, or Strus and LeVert for Johnson. So if you can find a deal that works, I think he's one of those players that it makes sense because you're going to be in the second apron for the next couple of years anyway. As long as you're not giving up too much, if you can get him, he fits in perfectly and does a lot of the things that can complement this core. But because of the lack of supply, because of the lack of assets and motivation that the Cavs have, it feels more like a pipe dream unless something breaks loose.
Yeah, and the one other option, which is a narrower window, I'll admit, but that the Cavs could be as opportunists, right? That's how they got Jared Allen. Like they had nothing to do with that huge Brooklyn mess that was going down, and then all of a sudden they need a third team to facilitate that move. I understand that's pre-aprons, and there's a little bit more challenges to that, but like I trust Kobe Altman that if they don't make a move, it's because they just couldn't find the right deal with everything we've talked about. Or I trust him to, if they need a third team and they can make it work financially, it's a move that could help them. I mean, that's the one option the Cavs have, is to kind of like just be like, hey, if you need a third team, give us a call. We'll see what we can do.
This is not going to be the case of Ferry sitting on his hands. If there's not a move to be made, it's not because it's for lack of trying. One of the other things that makes me a little bit more dim on the Nets is the Cavs have had interest in previous Nets wings, and it hasn't worked out well. They were really close to acquiring Bojan Bogdanovic at the deadline last year, but the Knicks swooped in at the last minute. That didn't work out. They stole my heart when they shipped Dorian Finney-Smith to the Lakers for the second time, because the first time was Royce O'Neal. That didn't work out. There was a lot of interest on both those guys, wanting Okoro and Wade. So I also just don't have a lot of confidence in that working relationship. Like some GMs just work well together. We've seen the Jazz and the Cavs work together for Damian James, Donovan Mitchell, for some other moves. So those things that maybe don't seem important are important. Not putting anything out there, but just talks with the Nets really haven't gone to the extent that maybe would have been productive for the Cavs, and makes me think, oh yeah, look at a discount.
Well, is that because they just gave the Cavs Jared Allen? Is that thing? Just sometimes you just don't want to do.
Fool me once.
Well, kind of going on both of you guys' points here. A team that is desperate to make a move is the Suns, and they have Royce O'Neal. So my proposed trade there, because they are desperate to get Jimmy Butler to the desert. Can the Cavs capitalize on that desperation? The salary matches would be Niang and Porter for Reese O'Neal. And then picks. Picks are picks.
I don't know if it's possible, and I love Georges Niang. I'd hate to see him go, but I think it's a deal you do with the Cavs. I just don't know how realistic it is. Luka would know better than me.
So like I said, you're pulling on my heartstrings, because Royce O'Neal was a guy that I loved and felt like would fit perfectly in this team. So never going to live that one down. But like we talked about earlier with the Suns, so a few things to keep in mind. They're a second apron team, so any deal they can't take back more money than they're sending out. So I think Royce O'Neal's about a $9-10 million deal this year, so they can't take more back more money than that, so that's something to keep in mind. He also can't aggregate players, so depending on the roster limit now, if they're 13, 14, 15 guys, you also have to figure out, does it work salary-wise? What they can do with the extra player, now they can waive them, but they can't combine players in a deal sending out. So those are all things you have to consider that make a lot of these deals harder. But for Royce O'Neal, I would love to, but again, I think you get back into, is it any different than what you have now between Levert, Okoro, Strus, Merrill? Like, where are the minutes going to be at? And unfortunately, I think he does act as terrific Dean Wade insurance, but he really doesn't have the size to scale up like you need a lot of these players to do. I think that's one of the things that roster construction wise that they can improve upon is they don't have a lot of scalability when it comes to going up. So you have, Merrill being a tier 2. He's kind of played some 3 because of other situations. You have Strus maybe being a small ball 4. You have Okoro being a 2-3, Karras being a 2-3. Dom's more of a 2. Garland's a 1 or 2. You don't have a lot of 3-4s like that Dean Wade, which is why I think he's so important because he does so much of everything that they need. So if O'Neal had a little bit more size and maybe can play up a little bit more like a Dorian Finney-Smith, I think it would make a lot more sense. But just because of everything where the Suns are at, but also positionally, not sure if it makes sense ultimately in the end.
So I got one more for you then. And this guy, he fits that 4-5 stretch guy. How about Denny? I'm not going to be able to get the last name.
Avdia.
Avadja from Portland.
Denny Avdia. Yep.
Avdia. Oof. That one would take Niang, Tyson, and then they have some trade exemption money to fill out the missing gap there. What are you guys' thoughts on that? He's been playing real great ball lately.
If you had Denny Avdia, would you trade him for Georges Niang and Jalen Tyson?
Yeah.
So, they did just acquire him this offseason. They traded one of their lottery picks straight up for Avdia. So he's been playing really well, probably the best Blazer players this year. So would be a great fit. One of those guys who fits into the core really, really well, but ultimately not sure if they have the amount of assets needed to really give the Blazers what they'd want if they even entertain that scenario.
Yeah, and
just looking at the Blazers as a team that has no direction, not going anywhere, kind of bottom of the league. So, yeah, that I guess that's my pitch. I'm not doing anything now.
You're looking in the right place. I think Portland's right in line for a fire sale. I just don't think any of their guys fit with the Cavs, but they're very guard heavy, which the Cavs are as well. Jeremy Grant is still a decent player on an absolutely astronomical contract that obviously would not fit in with the Cavs. And just so people know, we probably should have prefaced this earlier in case you're wondering or not sure. We keep talking about the Cavs like lack of assets. We're talking particularly about first-round draft picks because they gave up so many of them in the Donovan Mitchell trade. And they're going to be paying that out for the next 4 years still, I think, through 2029. And so that's really the one, I would say, as much as the salary cap is like kind of hamstringing the Cavs right now is, they lack financial flexibility, and then they don't have the thing that like bad teams want the most in trades. So it's unfortunate, but that's why we have, I think right now, the guy who's in line to be GM of the year in the seats that can, figure out if there's anything to be done that is attainable and would improve the team. They're going to do it. It's just he's working without a full hand.
In Kobe, we trust.
It's funny you mention that. Can you be GM of the year by not making any moves?
I mean, I think it's more. I think it's more of a 4-year build-up award, right? Because they're so good at this year because of the incredible work he's done for 4 or 5 years now in the post-LeBron rebuild. And yes, he didn't really do any. I mean, all they did is re-sign a couple of guys this offseason, but he also hired the leader in the clubhouse for Coach of the Year, right? So that would be his one move that he did do come in for this season. And so I think you can. I don't think. I mean, is it that hard to sign a free agent in the summer and then you're the GM of the year? Like, this is GM of the year should be you win this year for the job you've done the last 5 years, and I don't think anybody's done. I'd have to look, but I would take Kobe Altman's work over the last 5 years up against any other GM.
I mean, he did make moves, though. I mean, think about, the 2 biggest moves. I mean, 3 big moves, I would say, is hiring Kenny, extending Mobley, and extending Donovan Mitchell. I think those are 3 huge moves.
They're great moves, but any of us three could have done the last two.
And I say that in jest. I mean, I certainly, as a whole, he's worthy of that position. But I know typically, you're looking at coach of the year, executive of the year. Typically, like, what have you done this last offseason? So while he's definitely in the running, I'd be surprised if he makes it. Now, Kenny, I think Kenny definitely coach of the year. That I think probably is a shoe-in. Just with the job that he's done, especially being in his first year and probably achieving above expectations. I think Vegas had the Cavs at 46.5, 47, somewhere in that 45, 47 range. So considering that they're on track for a 65, 71 year, have to think that's a pretty strong bet at this point. I don't want to give out any odds. I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but you're probably too late on that boat.
Oh no, we're a positive betting podcast. and just to clean it up, it was 47.5 wins. It was their over/under, and they were plus 250 to win the division because they're in the same division as Milwaukee. And I have a little bit on both of those, so I'm very familiar with that number. And Cavs right now, I mean, they're projected at like a 72 win pace. I think the over/under now is like 63 or something. It's gone astronomical.
All right. Well, I know I've taken up a lot of you guys' time.
We're done? I thought we're going for another hour.
I will keep talking. My wife will be upset. But to kind of close this out with you guys, we had a comment on one of our Reddit threads from Firm Part 5419. That's just their username. I don't know any stories behind it, but
it's a family friendly show.
Very firm on that. So they posed the question: at what point in this rebuild do you start to believe that the core that we had was a championship core? I think it's perfectly in line with us talking about Kobe, kind of what he's done in the past years to put this team together, and especially when you have a LeBron James-sized crater in your roster the first year that you take the job. So I'll start with you, Kevin. When was your "this is the team that can win"?
I'll be totally honest. It was about 3 weeks into this season. Because I said at the beginning of the show, I never doubted the individual talents of the guys. I was a skeptic on would the Mitchell Garland backcourt work would the Mobley Allen backcourt or front court work, and would it all work together? And if we're being honest, there was reason to have some skepticism, right? And then this year, to all the guys' credits, to Kenny's credits, it all came together. I think the bench, and I know we're talking about the core, but all the guys outside the core, I think, are playing so far above expectations as a unit that, I truly started to believe this could be a championship game. I'll say about game 10 when they're 10-0. That's when I started really believing. How about you, Luka?
So I'd say acquiring Donovan Mitchell opened the window. Evan Mobley's leap this year has taken them through that window. Yeah. So they've been on that pathway and had, like you said, some of that talent, whether it fit all together, whether it was complementary, whether it was enough, we weren't sure about. But Evan Mobley taking the step, I think a good way of putting it too is that Donovan Mitchell is their best player, but Evan Mobley's their most important player. The step that he's taken this year, I think, is really what did it for me, is seeing the leap, seeing the progress, especially offensively. Instead of us hearing in training camp about J.B. Bickerstaff wanting to get Evan Mobley and Jared Allen more involved and put him at the elbows, we're actually seeing that in action with Mobley on top of the leap he's taking, just confidence-wise, aggressive-wise, shot-wise. That, more than anything else, has made me believe that this is very real. That not only do you have Darius Garland, who's now probably your second/third best player, Jared Allen being your fourth best player, but any one of these guys can be your best player on any given night. Go back to the Lakers game. You had Jared Allen go toe-to-toe with Anthony Davis, put up 20-10-plus double-double, same as Anthony Davis. Anthony Davis is their second best player, and that's the Cavs' fourth best player. So I think because you've now slotted everyone on the totem pole accordingly, and Evan Mobley has taken that leap, that has really made me believe that, yes, this is for real. Yes, they can really do some dangerous stuff, whereas before they had it and they were on that path, but now they're finally able to realize it.
What about you, Skylar? I know you're moderating here, but I want to get your take. Fire it out. Skylar is the biggest Cavs homer you'll ever meet. Just to preface this, so he's been believing since
this podcast, and I started talking about dynasty.
Yeah, he'll say when they drafted Darius Garland before the other three guys even showed up. But
he had vision.
Well, my vision, it is earlier than both of you guys, but mine would have been the year that they drafted Mobley, not because I knew so much about Mobley coming out, but right after the draft, they do the GM surveys and everything like that. And all the GMs said that the Cavs were going to be the worst team in the league. They are going to be terrible. Nobody understood the drafting of Evan Mobley when you already have Jared Allen. All they did that year was make the playoffs. They kicked ass that entire year and made the playoffs that year. That to me was when I was like, okay, this team has something growing, something there to capitalize on. That's even before Donovan Mitchell, because that was the trigger to Colby Altman to say, let's make a move to kind of do something with this. And that was the trigger to go get Donovan Mitchell.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think it's fair. I think both of your answers are fair. I guess I would say like the talent to win a championship versus like the team and everything to build a championship. I just thought like they didn't play nearly as well this year. The amount of times that Garland and Mitchell are breaking down defense and getting a guy a wide open three or Jared Allen a dunk, there was way more one-on-one going on previous to this year. So like, and it's all a build-up, right? And so I think it's completely fair to have started believing 3, 4, 5 years ago, whatever it was, with Skylar, or to be maybe a little bit more, I don't know, I don't want to say pessimist, but need a little bit more convincing, like myself or lesser extent Luka.
You talk about vision, taking Darius Garland when you had Colin Sexton and taking Evan Mobley when you had Jared Allen, that's paid off dividends. And I think it speaks to the acquisition that Kobe did at that time and really believing in best player available as opposed to trying to fit around maybe a piece that wouldn't be there. So if that didn't happen, we wouldn't be here. But also, shout out to the Houston Rockets. Thank you for taking Jalen Green because we greatly appreciate Evan Mobley.
You got to look at like some of those draft histories and be like, wow, you can't believe the misses. So
maybe I should have been earlier because I was living in Nashville and I saw one of the very few games that Darius Garland played at Vanderbilt, and I was like, why is this guy at Vanderbilt? Like, this guy's going to be in the league in 6 months.
So I mean, with that, I want to say go check out realcavsfans.com. Like I said, as you could tell from this episode, they put out great content, just both on court, off court, super knowledgeable. Luka, I want to thank you for coming on and giving us over an hour of your time. Do you have any parting words?
I don't know about knowledgeable, but we try, but certainly appreciate the plugs, appreciate having us on, and hope to do this again soon.
Awesome. Any closing remarks, Kevin?
Go Cavs.
All right. Well, from Kevin Lynch, Tim Daniels, Luka, and realcavsfans.com, have a good night, everyone.